January 2026 has been one of the longest decades in American history for reasons that are probably beyond the scope of this channel. But with regards to cars, the effects are extending to drivers in ways that compel a very important, vital question here. Which laws actually matter? Because when it comes to driving, you would think all of the rules of the road and of car ownership should have equal importance, or at least something close to it, right? But just this month, the federal government decided that the juice isn't really worth the squeeze when it comes to illegally modified diesel trucks. Which is bad enough, except in virtually the same breath, they've now refused to defund a federal mandate that pushes automakers toward impaired driving technology that could potentially shut off your car entirely. So which is it? Because in a world where all crime is bad, it sure does seem like we're doing a lot of picking and choosing. Do the people voting on these laws have enough of an understanding of cars to make any sort of informed decision? Or is this all a bunch of government overreach? How could this impact the future of car culture? Look, I'm already riled up, so it's probably a good thing it's the end of the month because Roman report at the end of the month, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars. On January 21st, the Department of Justice's Environment and Natural Resources Division stated publicly that it was, quote, exercising its enforcement discretion to no longer pursue criminal charges under the Clean Air Act based on allegations of tampering with onboard diagnostic devices in motor vehicles. End quote. So basically, if you do diesel deletes or tunes, from a criminal prosecution standpoint, you're basically in the clear, which is more than we can say about our supply of breathable air. Now, civil penalties can still be pursued, but then it seems like Congress kinda has bigger matters to address with regards to the automotive industry. Because the very next day, January 22nd, the House would vote down a resolution by Republican Representative Thomas Massey to defund a mandate that would make impaired driving detection systems required on future models. Nicknamed the Halt Drunk Driving Act, in honor of the Abbas family, who were tragically killed by a wrong-way drunk driver in 2019, this mandate wasn't actually its own thing, but rather Section 24220 of the 2021 Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And even back in 2021, opponents of the mandate argued that what the government was proposing was tantamount to a kill switch on your car that could disable it remotely. Per the mandate, the Department of Transportation would have to issue a final rule on the timeline for implementing this technology, and then all cars manufactured after the effective date must comply. Yet the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration would have responsibilities too. As Sean Tucker of Kelley Blue Book explains, quote, Congress passes laws. Agencies like the NHTSA write regulations that explain the specifics of how those laws will be carried out. When an agency writes a new regulation, it must post drafts for public comment, allow time for the public to respond, and then finalize them. To date, NHTSA has not posted a draft. Congress gave the agency 5 years to complete the rule, but required a draft in 2024. No draft has been published. In a 2024 report to Congress, the agency said it was working diligently on a rule. End quote. So yeah, this has been in the works for a while, but even when it was introduced in 2021, it spurred controversy and talks of government overreach back when Democrats controlled the House. However, despite Republicans now having control of the House, Massey's proposal to defund the mandate still failed by an overwhelming majority, with 57 Republicans crossing the aisle to help vote it down. Which, I mean, of all things for both sides to agree upon, it's somehow this. Maybe it's all performative and will never actually be implemented. But I would argue that this should probably bother you, if for no other reason than the potential effects it can have not just on the industry, but on drivers themselves. Let's start with the HALT Drunk Driving Act first. Because, in a way, you could see how politicians might view this as a good idea, particularly when Mothers Against Drunk Driving are among the groups lobbying, campaigning in memory of people they've lost to drunk drivers, and claiming that these driver monitoring systems could save over 10,000 lives every year, potentially, and declaring that, hey, it's not like they introduce any new privacy risks that aren't already a part of the modern telemetry-based driving experience. And so yeah, from that standpoint, you can kind of understand where politicians might view this as a manifest good. But again, there's nuance here, because is this not just a glorified kill switch? Because the argument is that these systems would somehow detect if you were driving impaired, and then disable your car to prevent you from causing an accident. Except, doesn't that also kind of seem like it would cause an accident? Like, unless it was some kind of self-driving technology that could pull over on your behalf first, before just shutting itself down, you know? And would the car then, like, call the cops on you? If nothing else, while Massey's attempted repeal failed, it hasn't stopped other politicians from speaking out about this. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, seen here looking like a man with strong opinions about which types of grapes have the best mouthfeel, went on Twitter to claim, quote, "The idea that the federal government would require auto manufacturers to equip cars with a kill switch that can be controlled by the government is something you'd expect in Orwell's 1984. End quote. And let me just say, something has gone terribly, heinously wrong when you could potentially find yourself agreeing with Ron DeSantis, seen here looking like a dad who brings his own cooler to the water park and then calls his lawyer when they won't let him in with it. And look, I joke, but the reality is that I've lost family to drunk drivers. I have loved ones who have never and will never recover from the scars that a drunk driver's selfish actions left behind. And I feel like karma might curse my decision to question this mandate, because theoretically we should be in support of any method that could potentially save lives from drunk drivers. But I'm genuinely conflicted here, and it breaks my heart to feel this way. Yet, there has to be a better way than this, right? You could argue that telemetry systems in your car collect data in ways that already expose you to the risk of having your car hijacked by ransomware controlled by a third party. But it isn't any less frustrating when the third party shutting off your car is the automaker themselves, under order of the federal government. And at a philosophical level, automakers have already made it so that you don't really own your car even after you've purchased it. I mean, Lord knows I've made enough videos about all the different ways how you're being charged for subscriptions for things that used to be included in the base price of the car. But a kill switch essentially rewrites the conditions of access in general. It means you're right back to asking for permission to drive in the first place. You, a fully grown adult, are suddenly 16 again, asking to borrow the car so you can try to cop some side boob at the 7 o'clock showing of Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle. I'm not arguing that people should be allowed to drive drunk, but I am asking how this technology could possibly be calibrated in such a way that it can tell the difference between a drunk driver and, say, someone defensively swerving to avoid an obstacle in the road. Automakers have a hard enough time building a capacitive touchscreen that actually responds to your touch. Right now, the systems have all the touch responsiveness of a wife who's mentally checked out of the marriage. And now you're telling me that these people are going to build technology that, at least according to the Halt Drunk Driving Act, will involve some sort of passive detection method for blood alcohol levels of 0.08 or higher? Yeah, no. I don't trust any automaker to pull that off because, first of all, I'm not exactly sure how you do that passively. I don't care if it's breath, touch, cameras, whatever. Do you really trust car companies to build a system that won't slap you with a false positive because it missed an over-the-air update? I wouldn't expect it from automakers on their least stressful day, much less when they have the government breathing heavily over their shoulder like that kid from Hey Arnold. But this also brings up an issue of passive harm versus active harm. Drunk driving is a very active harm. It's an action somebody takes with direct and immediate consequences. But while choosing a tune or a delete that causes pollution is also an active choice, the harm is almost more passive because the conversation that surrounds rolling coal doesn't carry the same sort of gravity as driving under the influence. Yet causing pollution through emissions modifications can cause the sort of harm that cuts lives short. Diesel exhaust is carcinogenic, and excess nitrous oxide and diesel pollution has been linked to everything from higher instances of lung cancer to cardiovascular disease and asthma and other breathing-related difficulties. And the kicker is that this disproportionately affects children because they're breathing this polluted air at a time when their lungs are still developing. It's passive harm in the sense that I don't think people make the argument that exhaust emissions can kill you in slow, exacting ways. It's not really promoted that way. It's promoted as a harm to the environment, to the climate, to the long-term sustainability of our planet. And so it's kind of worrying that emissions compliance is something that now is only going to be deterred by civil penalties. And sure, nobody wants to lose money. That should be deterrent enough. But some people don't care and just do it anyway. And in some cases, even when there are consequences, they end up having worse follow-through than George R.R. Martin. For instance, just this past November, mechanic Troy Lake Sr. was pardoned by the president for conspiring to violate the Clean Air Act when he allegedly disabled OBD systems on more than 300 heavy-duty commercial trucks. 300! Now, the defense here, of course, is that this isn't substantially changing anything about the way emissions are handled now. While the Environmental Protection Agency may have gone after shops that did deletes, I would imagine you typically had to be in a state or county that had emissions inspections to be caught in the first place. And besides, people have always done this and will continue to do it, whether violation of the Clean Air Act was a civil or criminal offense. They'd do it whether or not the Clean Air Act was rolled back or repealed altogether. So yeah, I can see the argument that much like with the Halt Drunk Driving Act, nothing is really changing here because nothing is truly being implemented. Not yet, anyway. But I do think it still matters within the context of what this says for government overreach within the auto industry. Because what all of these things do, however well-intentioned or ill-regarded, is train you to live in a world in which nothing actually matters. Laws can be changed arbitrarily without much thought to logistics or long-term damage. And yeah, I know, you can say it's always been like this, and you would be right. But all of this feels like an extension of a field trip to a shadowy destination because, yeah, right now it's driver monitoring technology that would be difficult to implement and diesel deletes that were hard to prosecute anyway. But once you reach those milestones, It's not a long walk to suddenly have the government legislate access and decide who can drive at all. Listen to me here. It is impossible to comply with laws that have no consistency nor any regard for the people faced with the task of reconciling the contradictions those laws contain. Oh, you can pollute freely, but you can't move freely. We've told you for years that emissions are deadly and represent a critical environmental hazard, but also we're not going to hold people criminally liable for contributing to the increase of those harmful emissions. So either we were just lying to you about emissions the entire time, or they really are harmful, but doing anything about it just isn't a priority right now. We want drunk people off the road, and we don't care who catches strays from software that can't tell the difference between an impaired driver and a defensive one, because that's what government is now. We just cast a really wide net, and it doesn't matter if innocent people get dragged up from the ocean floor, because there's no such thing as a case-by-case basis when the judge is a bunch of ones and zeros. Due process? What's that, a new flavor like Baja Blast? I want to believe in our institutions, but this past month really, has made tending to the flame kind of difficult. Because it feels like most of these laws are written by a bunch of cold-handed, double-speaking, fart-savoring, self-appointed main characters who are underwater on their moral debt and so far removed from humanity they have to look up economy tickets on Spirit Airlines just to get back to common decency. These are people who will tell you that if you just comply, you don't have anything to worry about, but God forbid you walk past while they have their iPhone unlocked. Just a trail mix of solicitous virtue signalers mixed in there with dead-eyed, maladjusted hate merchants, collectively riding high on the overcooked hog of their fly-by-night values and setting everything on fire because this is hell we're talking about here and we have temperatures to live up to. Am I being overdramatic? Maybe, but all of this is coming from a place of uncertainty. 2 weeks ago, I told my niece that seeing her and her friends have such empathy for other people and caring so deeply about the state of the world, completely unprompted, is why I have hope for the future and why I think her generation could be the one to change things. Then I thought to myself, how sad. That was supposed to be us. And I'm sure Gen X felt the same way when us millennials came along. And God forbid my niece ever has to tell her niece one day that her generation will be the one to fix things, to change the world, to truly win. Because winning, actually winning, should mean that everybody wins. That we care about each other enough to make sure that everybody here, not on a piece of land, but here in this mortal fucking plane, feels like they deserve to be here. Oh yeah, cars. So this is the part of the video where I put on a tinfoil hat and try to decipher why they're doing this. Because I do think there's a clear and obvious argument that the government has always chosen which laws matter more than others, particularly where money is involved. So some crimes are allowed to slide, while others are enforced, but only insofar as enforcement doesn't require significant resources. And so my conspiratorial sense of mind right now has me wondering, if this legislation isn't just about outsourcing law enforcement to machines, but I can understand the argument, at least in theory, that outsourcing drunk driving enforcement to technology frees up law enforcement to focus on other societal ills. But I don't know that that's how it would work in practice, you know? And when it comes to emissions enforcement, or the lack thereof, this really does feel like a case of the optics being bad, doesn't it? And look, I'm gonna go full tinfoil hat here, but think about it. Prosecuting people for diesel deletes is a bad look because it essentially targets small, blue-collar businesses like repair shops or working-class drivers, to the point that it sort of comes across like a targeted campaign against people whose votes they kinda need. And that's true for both sides of the aisle. Maybe one side rolls coal more often than the other, but they're both out there doing crazy deletes and tunes. And in the congressional tradition of making sure all of your constituents can potentially catch strays from any single decision you make, I can see how politicians would just want to avoid blowback here, the potential blowback anyway. Because really, a more generous reading would suggest that there's no real way for them to win here because it's a catch-22. Either you're going after working class people despite doing the legally correct thing, or you don't go after them and then people are wondering why you're not prosecuting people who are breaking the law. But again, that's a very generous reading there, at least I think. But another reason I think could be behind this, although it's kind of on the lower end of likely reasons in my opinion, is that actually going after everyone who conspired to violate the Clean Air Act is that going after everyone kind of just draw attention to how widespread the problem is, which makes the government look bad because it makes their law look ineffective. It's better to just back off and walk away on your own terms, right? But walking away creates another big issue, which is that the consequences aren't really going to affect the people writing the laws. Because God forbid, if you end up in the hospital with, cancer, cardiovascular disease, asthma, and your healthcare is jacked all the way to the ceiling, it's not like lawmakers are footing the bill. It's a potentially really messed up situation. Laws don't have to be perfect. Flexibility is the hallmark of any halfway decent society. That they learn and pivot to address the needs of the people, that they create laws, refine those laws, and live up to the expectations that they themselves set every election season. But while laws don't have to be perfect, they can be better. If a better world is just out of reach, the government should be building a ladder to that world. But the ladder to utopia shouldn't have human rungs. But what do you think? Is this government overreach? Is it an overreaction? I genuinely want to know your thoughts. Seriously, I'll be in the comments section, so keep an eye out. My screen name is Limited Time Roman. Let's talk it out. But if you enjoy automotive history or just automotive disaster or transportation infrastructure lore, I have 2 new videos out. One on the Atlanta snowpocalypse of 2014, and my most recent video detailing the tragic Mont Blanc tunnel fire of 1999. The links to those videos are in the description, along with other videos that I think you might like. Now, if you enjoy these videos and want to see more of them, please leave a like, subscribe, tap the bell icon so you're notified for every new video. But if you really want to show your love in the biggest possible way, join us on Patreon for just $1 for early, ad-free videos and exclusive content that's never going on main. Thank you so much for watching, and have an outstanding rest of your week.